Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's Ask Me Almost Anything is, what is an indie film? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Everything at Writing for Screens, a channel that is trying to teach some basic tools, skills, and process for writing, especially writing for screens, screenwriting, TV writing, web writing, any kind of screen. My name is Glenn Gers, and I am trying to give you a bit of what I had to figure out for myself in my 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am leaving behind a bunch of lessons which I have made into videos. They are here on my channel. This is a screenshot of my channel page in case you don't know about it. And here we go. Oh, there it is. Okay. The first three playlists on my channel page are going to be the first from the top: Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. There's going to be a total of about 50 of these. There's about 45 right now. 10-minute videos that give you a condensed, hopefully useful set of tips and tricks and tools and insights that I have developed in the easiest possible usable way I could think of. The title and the thumbnail tell you what I am talking about in that lesson. Dramatic action, genre, flashbacks. So therefore you can scroll through that long list and see, hey, what do I want to know about this or that? Or if I am interested in something, maybe he's covered it. That is the main thing I have to offer to you. Then now and then I do these live streams. Currently, I am doing them Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's the time I am in. And now, hello Donna, how's Australia? Hello Sonia, how is Germany? Hi Dimitri, how is FM? And Nathan, how you doing? Good to see you. Great to have a bunch of you here. We are going to dive into a topic that I have just been thinking about a little, with some advice at the end. But also, I will be happy to answer questions because that's what Ask Me Almost Anything means. All right, the question here is, today's first big question: what exactly is an indie film? Everyone talks about indie film now. It's easy enough to refer to indie films, but in fact, how do you define it? What is it? And I'm asking this in a useful way, not in an intellectual, let's argue, academic way. I am saying what for a writer, for a filmmaker, is indie? What is the difference between indie and non-indie? What's that about? So let's talk about the basic original definition, which I believe is no longer that valuable. The original definition is... it's something that was, I didn't make a slide for this. It's something that was not financed by a studio, okay? The thing you have to remember is that, that for most of film history started about 1905, and therefore the past 115 years is all of film history. Hi, Michael. Good. I'm glad that you're at a doctor's appointment. Remember, this talk will be available afterwards. It's always there. You can just click on it at your time. Hi, Ches. Very good to see you. Good evening to you. Okay, so let's talk about indie for a bit. Here's the deal with indie. For most of film history, the entire art of film, what we would call the movies, at least as dominated by American film, which it was for most of the 20th century, Hollywood, for lack of a better term, was a monopoly. Okay, from the first 10 years or so of film history, everything was an indie film. People just grabbed cameras and made films. Cameras were very lightweight. They were not that expensive. People could do it. They just made them. People just set up film companies left and right. There were hundreds of film companies, which came and went as companies will, sort of like tech right now. Starting in the 1920s, certainly, there was the rise of several major studios that produced and distributed films. This was the monopoly that I am talking about. From the 1920s, basically all the way through until the past 10 years, they have controlled the art of movies. They especially controlled it in the time from the 1920s through the 1960s, the 50s and 60s. And I'm going to briefly get into that, very briefly. I love to lecture about film history, but I do want to make this practical for you. And so I urge you to look into this stuff. But right now, the thing is, the distributors, the theater chains, owned the studios. And the studios made the movies for the theaters. That's why the studios existed. That's why Hollywood existed, to provide something to show in the movie theaters. It wasn't like they made movie theaters because movies were so cool and they were going to show them. They made movies because they could sell tickets at the theater. So it's important to remember, distribution owned movies for most of Hollywood history. Okay. And very rapidly, in the course of about 20 years, at the beginning of film history, the equipment became very expensive and complicated and hard to use. Once they started using big film and big cameras, they had enormous lights because you needed a lot of light to get that film to work. Also, in order to do sound films, which started in 1927, they needed sound stages because you had to shut out all the other sound. So sound, lighting, all that stuff made the cameras were huge. It took, they had to have them on little tanks that they would put around. It was really hard and expensive to make a movie. Hi, Dee Teacher. Good to see you. So they owned and controlled movies. There were very, very few. They were producing and distributing more movies than everybody else in the rest of the world put together. Okay, so. What happened was, after the Second World War, in the late 1940s, the courts broke up. I thought this might happen. I'm sorry. We're having a problem with my camera. Let me see if I can get it to work again. I don't know if I can. Anyway, the studios were broken up from the theater chains. Hold on. Are you here? Am I here? Yes, I'm here. Okay. This is when independent film essentially started, because until then, it was almost impossible to make a film without a movie studio behind you. And if you made it, you had nowhere to show it, because the movie theaters with the projectors, which were no small item either, nobody owned them except the same company. So after 1948, U.S. versus Paramount Pictures, but it really referred to all the studios, new theaters could open that could show whatever they wanted. This changed everything. This is the beginning of independent film. However, what happened was there was no way to supply them. You had to have the finances to make a movie and the equipment and etc. And they couldn't afford to compete with the production value and movie stars who were all contracted to the studios. And therefore, independent needed something else. And in the 1950s and 1960s, independent film meant either two things. One, exploitation film, grindhouses, drive-ins, cheapies, which they had to sell, was something you couldn't see in a Hollywood movie, because Hollywood movies were a monopoly. They were strictly controlled. You could not see members of any ethnic group except white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. You could not see sex and violence. You could not see unhappy endings. There were so many things you could not see. So the independent people said, hey, if we show those things, people are going to come see that just because they've never seen it on a screen before. And so that's what independent film was for about 10, 15 years. The other thing that was happening was that some of those films, theaters, especially in cities, would show films from other places. Okay, very, very briefly, I'm just going to quickly check the comments because I see that there are some. Donna is briefly asking a question. I'm going to answer this after I'm done with my indie thing. How much? Okay, I am definitely going to get to that in a second, Donna. Let me finish my rant about indie film. Hi, Wolf. Okay, and then I've got Michael Jode has got a question. I'm going to answer that. I'll put it on the list. And I agree with Burgundy in general. Okay, independent film. So the two things that happened in the 1950s and 60s that you could see outside of Hollywood were exploitation films and foreign films. And there were things happening in other countries where they told stories entirely differently, a whole different way of looking at what you could do with a movie, because movies are not required to tell Hollywood stories. The camera does not insist upon a 3-act structure. So Italian films, neorealism, the French New Wave, the British angry young films, Japanese, Indian, Swedish films, they were bringing entirely different conceptions of what a movie could be and blowing a very small percentage of the audience's mind. Most people didn't go to those movies. They were college students and artists and intellectuals in cities. That small audience had a big effect because in that audience were all the next generation of filmmakers. And they were like, holy crap, we can do all these things. We can do jump cuts. We can do shooting on the streets. We can tell the story about ordinary people in their ordinary lives. We can do dreamlike things. Whatever they saw in these foreign films and these exploitation films, they glommed into them. And so therefore there came a thing called New Hollywood. New Hollywood. Hi, B. Junior. Do you have a previous life or series on short films? I wish I did live. I do not know that much. I will talk about that after my indie film thing. But yes, I will talk about it shorts. Okay, so now we're in the 1960s, the thing called New Hollywood. What happened was a younger generation of filmmakers who had grown up working in exploitation films, because that's where they would hire some 20-year-old who didn't know somebody in the unions. They got to work on indie films and art, either in exploitation films. So almost all of the major filmmakers of the 1960s and 70s started out in exploitation films, horror films, sex films, not porn, but sexy films. Although some did porn. Violent films, motorcycle films, drug films. There were all these films that came out, and they worked on them because that's who would hire them. And they got to make their films, so they had this whole new attitude, which they brought. And at the time, in the late 1960s, a new audience, an audience of young people, wanted something that was anti-establishment, that was counterculture, that was new. And these filmmakers could make that. The early indies, John Cassavetes with Shadows from 1959, Andy Warhol in the 1960s. His 70s work is sort of deliberate exploitation just to try and make money. It's just sort of interesting concept, but art exploitation, but they're not good, in my opinion. David Lynch in 1977, John Waters in 1972 with Pink Flamingos. Lynch, of course, did Eraserhead. The point was, for a very brief moment, exploitation, art, and foreign film style came into Hollywood. However, by the 1980s, corporations had taken over the studios and brought the blockbuster technology and mentality into filmmaking, which is great. I'm not going to turn down blockbusters. I love tentpoles. I love comic book movies. I love disaster movies. I love all that stuff. So it's not bad. It's just that they, once again, had a monopoly. They had a lock on what was in the theaters simply by power of money. Against that, the independent movie industry began to build. Sundance Film Festival, video stores, which allowed people to see movies that without the control of the theaters, cult films, which were very often seen only on video, midnight movies, in which small independent theaters would show weird movies at midnight on the weekends. This allowed the rise of a new business, ultra-low, weird, artsy, indie films. John Sayles, 1979, Return of the Secaucus 7. 1984, Jim Jarmusch, Stranger Than Paradise. 1984, Blood Simple by the Coen brothers. 1986, Spike Lee, She's Gotta Have It. So in the 1980s, an industry rose up for people who were tired of same old corporate films. That industry then became a business, and it became a big business. There is a book called, I can't remember what it's called, by Peter Biskind. It's the sequel to Easy Riders, and it's about Sundance and the Weinstein Company. Anyway, the indie business built up in the 1990s. Steven Soderbergh, Robert Rodriguez, obviously Quentin Tarantino, they all came through that door. Okay, so the basic picture here is there developed a corporate studio movie industry, which was most of the movie business, and then a solid, smaller indie film business. More sensitive stories there you saw things that were more inventive or imaginative, or covering topics or populations that were not acceptable to Hollywood. That's when the word indie film words started to show up in the language, in the culture. Okay, at that point, indie became a genre. What happened was the studios saw that there was a hunk of their business being taken over by other people, and sometimes it got to be a big hunk, like with Tarantino. And so they opened divisions to make indie films. So now there were studios making indie films. Some of those survived, some of those didn't. But the attitudes and style was absorbed into Hollywood's mainstream. The content now is very present in studio films. Being different or even transgressive has become fairly acceptable. Something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Moonlight, these are all indie films in spirit, and yet they're winning Best Picture. Nomadland, and often doing very well at the box office. So here's the deal. The entire history of film up until the past 10 years, indie meant not from the small conglomerate of studios that controlled most Hollywood filmmaking. And there developed an alternative stream of filmmaking called indie. But now we are in a new era. We are at the beginning of a new era of film history. We're actually here, right now, you are in a moment of historic change. 100 years from now, they're going to look back and say, oh yeah, the 2020s, the 2010s and 2020s, that's when the history of film went through into its next epoch, its next era. You're here, so pay attention to this. This is my point. The reason I am talking about this is because you have an opportunity, if you do not cling to the old, dying definitions, you have the opportunity to do some cool stuff. So here's what I think. I think there are three types of indie film. There is essentially studio indie. And I would say, for instance, a Wes Anderson film. Okay, a Wes Anderson film is made on a large budget by a company that is technically an independent company, A24. But honestly, A24 is essentially what they used to call a mini major. It's a studio. Whether or not it is one of the studios, it is operating in the same world with the same rules, the same people. Everything is the same. There is no difference between an A24 film and a studio film, except they have a different aesthetic because they're selling to a different market. That's just like saying Universal likes to do horror films and car films. There is no difference between a studio indie and a studio film, except some stylistic differences. Then there is what I would call professional indie. This is a film that is made by people in the film business already or close to it who have found a way or decided to take a step aside and make something offbeat and interesting. There's lots of them. They're terrific. They can be wonderful. They very often are the door into other films, but it is sort of a place where you get often movie stars in indie films, but they are financed outside of the studio system, and they are made without a distributor in place. These are things that don't really matter to the film goer. They matter only to the film makers in the sense that they need to know where they're going to get some money. Hi, Gene. Word number 6. How you doing? Thank you, Heath. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So professional indies are either people who have worked their way up in professionalism, in skills, in abilities, to the point where they can make a movie that is essentially at the fringe of Hollywood. And sometimes they get name actors. They have extraordinary production value often. Like there's a movie called The Florida Project, which is very much indie. And yet Willem Dafoe's in it. It's made on a high level of technical quality. And it was released by the studio system. These are great films. I am not saying anything bad about them. I'm saying that they are a definition of a type of indie, which I would call professional indie. These two, studio indie and professional indie, have been essentially the mainstream of indie for the past 20, 30 years, since the 1990s. I thought studio indie differed from regular studio movies was the input or lack of from producers. I wish that were true, but that is not true. Studio indies can, frankly, I believe no one tells Wes Anderson what to do. I would be willing to bet that that Wes Anderson does not get a lot of notes. So the idea, I guess what you're saying is, doesn't that make that different from a big studio film? I would say that, except Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg, the big studio people also did. I think not getting input from studio executives is really just a matter of how much money you have made or power you have in the business. Tom Cruise, I suspect, does not get a lot of notes. He doesn't direct, but he controls the films he's in. So my answer is, when you're in the studio system, the amount of notes and the amount of power you have, the amount of control you have, is entirely negotiable depending on the power of the artist and the relative weakness of the studio in their essential deal. But there's not like a policy, they're A24, leave them alone. A24 may have a policy internally of not interfering, but I don't know. Weinstein, famously, aside from his crimes, also committed aesthetic crimes because he was the major indie producer of the 1990s. He trashed people's movies, destroyed their work, or recut it in however, better or worse, he controlled those indies. And then now and then he would let people alone if they built that relationship with him, usually because they had made money. Okay, so the third type of indie is what I'm calling outsider film. They're developed in the world of visual art and the world of painting, a thing called outsider art in the 1970s and 80s. People who had no training whatsoever got hold of some paints and some canvas because they loved the idea of it, they wanted to do it, and they just did it. And sometimes their work was very primitive, sometimes their work was very cool but unusual. But the main thing is they worked and learned outside of the system. And people started to discover this work called outsider art, and they started to have galleries for it and stuff like that. And it, once again, became a genre of insider art. There's an argument to be made that Basquiat and Haring and a lot of the painters from the 90s were working in that genre and were brought into the high-end fold. The point is, that was never possible with indie film because of the difficulty of production. Anyone can find some paints and a canvas. At even when it wasn't quite as easy as going to the local craft store, you could get some paint, even if it was house paint, and do a painting. So outsider art was possible. What's happened now, which is totally new, is that's possible for filmmaking. Because of digital technology, outsider film used to be a very, very rare thing. It was happening. All those things I mentioned, Cassavetes, David Lynch, John Sayles, Spike Lee, Kevin Smith, they all made outsider films, got discovered by the insiders who said, oh, cool, for whatever reason, we think this can sell. And then they were upgraded and sold through the system. But they started out as outsider artists. So what that did is it developed in the early years of indie a mythology that the point of doing outsider film was to get in to Hollywood. With the result that almost all of the people who did that found out they hated Hollywood. John Sayles, Kevin Smith, David Lynch, they all said, oh, cool, I can get Hollywood. Oh my God, I am going to go back to do my own thing my own way. And they had big enough names then that they could find sources of financial support elsewhere. And they continued to make indie film. Now and then you get a Tarantino who just moved right into the business. But mostly indie film artists discovered that legend of becoming the Hollywood indie is very rare and mostly frustrating. So my point is, get in on this insider film. If you are interested in film in any way, learn about outsider film. Learn about indie film in the past 30, 40 years. Learn about Cassavetes and Smith and Spike Lee. Learn about their early work. Learn about Mumblecore, which was a video movement to do ultra cheap DIY indie films in the early 2000s. Greta Gerwig came out of that movement. Get in on this. Is what you should know about indie. Most indie is not indie. Most indie is essentially a branch of Hollywood. But outsider film is opening up. It is possible now in ways that people aren't even really sure what to do with. And this, once again, just like outsider painting or any other art form, most of the time you're not going to make the big bucks. Most of the people in Hollywood are not making the big bucks. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Most people in Hollywood are not doing what they want if they are getting paid. So the thing I urge you is to try to learn about outsider film. The reason is twofold. One, it's the best way to get in the sense that if you do something original, if your talent works well with the art form and you can find a way, like Chloe Zhao, you may get to make a Marvel movie. You may never want to make a Marvel movie again, but who knows? The point is that outsider film is a legitimate path in. But the cool thing about outsider film is even if you don't get in the big show, you get to make movies. You may get to build your own small community of audiences and filmmakers and get to do the thing you love. So I urge you to study indie film not as a path to Hollywood, but as an art you can do now. That used to be really hard. It would take so long to be able to get hold of the equipment. It was so hard to get hold of a camera and sound equipment and make a movie. It was nearly impossible. Now, a 10-year-old can make a feature film with their phone. So please, I beg you, what the lesson of indie film is that we have reached a new era, and it's just beginning, in which the language of film, the story of film art is about to blow wide open. And there's going to be a huge lock, just like there has always been, on the big money. But the rest of the field is going to be open in a way that it never was before. So that is my point. Okay, so Gene F loves Cassavetes. And you know what? The interesting thing about Cassavetes, I'm going to actually do a live stream about Cassavetes and a couple other indies, is I love how he does it. I don't love what he does. I have a hard time watching his movies because I find them hard to follow, hard to care about. At the same time, I love the language of it, the idea of it, the ability to just make these weird, poetic, improvisational movies. It's a new element of film, and that's what I find so exciting. Okay. Is that why so many famous names from Hollywood made movies to be watched directly on streaming? In a way, yes. The streaming platforms are now theaters. Streaming platforms are where you make art, film or TV art. So therefore, yes, it is why the reason is because the distribution of film is just moving to streaming. That's how everyone is going to watch 90% of what they watch. In fact, at this point, I think that's already true. So the answer is, although there are some people who cling to, I want my audience to see it in a theater, I want them to see it on film, a lot of things like that, which are frankly, that's lovely. That's like saying I wish my audience could go to Broadway and hear unamplified something. Like it's niche. It's not important. What's important is Hollywood is moving into streaming. Hollywood is moving into digital. So yes, I've come to the realization that I want rogue outsider indie. Yes, like so cheap no one will want to come to it. Yes, absolutely. I think that's great. I absolutely can tell you that the thing is, it's doable, more doable than it's ever been. The odds of it making money are slight, but you never know, and the odds of it being satisfying are enormous. Hi, Di. Welcome. People will want to watch it. Yes, absolutely. What's going to happen is there's going to come a streaming service for outsider film. It's going to be curated because a lot of these things are unwatchable. A lot of them are bad. Just like a lot of outsider paintings are not very good. That's okay. But what's going to happen is somebody's going to curate the interesting stuff into a streaming service, and that's what it's going to be. And it's going to be like what art theaters used to be. There used to be art houses that would show weird foreign films and indie films. That's going to happen on streaming. Just figuring out the finances is tough because it costs a lot of money to run a streaming service. That's the problem. Okay, and yes, absolutely. People will want to watch them. Hi, Butte. That's okay. I am not keeping track of who's late or who's early. In the 1970s, a small press movement took our books from coast to coast. In the 1970s, alternative small press publishers started to do this with books. Currently, you can now make music and avoid the industry to a certain extent. The problem is the money is still being pinched off by the streaming services, Spotify, etc. But my main point is that you are all in a moment when what was really, really hard to do, and it's still hard to make a good movie, but at least it's not that hard to get the damn camera. That's the point. The point is, like, it was brutally hard for John Sayles or Spike Lee to get their film processed, and you don't have to worry about that. Besides, some streaming platforms like Tubi are free or cheap. Yes, and you're going to have to. This is developing. The odds are that one of the ways to do this, aside from obviously YouTube or Vimeo and stuff, the question is how to get people to see it, but also just set up your own website and direct traffic from there. Okay, let's get to some questions. All right, Donna asked a question back when, and it was this. How much can you mock humanity as a species in a film with a blood and actually have people watch it? I would say a lot, especially right now. People are legitimately and righteously pretty ticked off at humanity. Humanity has failed in many ways, and I would say that there is a legitimate attack on humanity that Absolutely, Thanos was right, and that there's, there are too many people, and people do not behave uniformly well, and there's some problems with people. That means that I believe, I am not the authority, I do not make this decision as to will people watch it, but I do believe that there's a fair number of people who are frustrated with humanity's failings and would love to see that put into art. So the short answer is just from my opinion, because I know you're dealing with mythic characters versus human characters, and I believe that's a great topic to get into. Who is, what is, would we be better not being human? Would we be better as angels or something? And I do not mean death. I mean like some other form. Good questions. Okay. Michael Jode, I have a sad ending and a happy ending planned for my short. Is one superior to the other? No. What is important is which you want to try, which you want to do. In fact, you can even try shooting both, editing both, presenting both to test audiences, seeing how you feel about how they react. But the essential question about your question would be superior in what way? Superior intellectually, superior morally, superior financially. The answer is, with shorts, none of those matter. It's not like there's a big shorts business. It's not like the question would then be, is it superior in that Hollywood, once again, we're all trying to get into Hollywood. Does Hollywood want something? Hard to say. There's a lot of downer stuff right now that's doing very well. I like a lot of it. Is Hollywood? It's not like Hollywood is insisting on happy endings. So the question would be superior in what way? Can you define what your question is about for yourself? Because then you can do research on that, in the sense that if you believe that Hollywood wants a happy ending, go with that. I would say that what we're really talking about here is you're making a choice that you can live with, because that's really the answer to artistic questions. The answer is, if I choose to do a sad ending and people say, oh, I don't like that, will you be okay with that? Everything is a choice, and every choice has a price. And art is making choices. That is what art is. The art is making choices. The big question you have is, how do I make it work? How do I make a happy ending believable? How do I make a happy ending emotional? How do I make a sad ending still worthwhile? Not depressing. These are all questions for you when you make the choice, but there is no answer about what it should be. Especially with a short, because there's no money riding on it. Shorts don't make money, so therefore there's no business. Okay, which brings us to Junior Fallon's question. Do I have a live session on short film or a series on short films? No. And the reason is, I don't know that much about short films because I have never in my life made short films or really watched that many short films. I'm just not good on that topic. There is a lot out there. What I would say is most of the things I talk about are pretty adaptable to short films. Like, I believe that my understanding of character applies to a short. A short is about somebody doing something or wanting something, usually, often. And then the question is, why can't they get it? What's going to happen if they try to get it? How does it end? Those questions are still going to be relevant. My understanding of dialogue, which is that it would come from dramatic action, my understanding of what dramatic action is. So basically, most of my videos will apply to a short. But I do not know about shorts very much. I do know, like I said, it's not like a big business. There's not like a lot of money in shorts, which is fine. It's, money is not the point of art. We do not do art to make money. That's a dumb reason to do art. There are so many better ways to make money. Art is a notoriously unreliable way to make money. Okay. Let's see. Hi, Doreen. Very nice to have you here. I am very glad that you are here. Yes, Pergity. See, this is good. We are supporting each other. And in fact, I think Donna's story is going to be good. Okay. Planet of the Apes is a good humanity. Yeah, absolutely. There's lots. There's lots of stuff. Yeah, it's easy enough to see humanity mocked. Okay. In the spirit of AMA, what happened to the ice cream cone? As in, where is it behind me? Or what happened to it? Like how did I get it? Or how did it lose its light bulb? The answer to what happened to it is just, hold on a second. Let me see if I can. This is a risk. It's right there. It's right there. I just am doing the other side of my office. My desk is here, that's there, and then I shoot my videos further down the wall, and therefore the camera gets the light bulb, the ice cream there. If you mean the ice cream used to have a light bulb in it when I originally bought it, there's no outlet near the light bulb, so I just don't do that. Yeah, superior to what, really? Hello, Akio. Very nice for you to be here. I am very glad to see you. Was Disfigured and Like.SHARE.FOLLOW outsider films? Great question, because the answer is one was, one wasn't. Disfigured was an outsider film in every way. I financed it myself. I made it, I produced it myself. It was entirely under my personal control with my money. The only thing that was not distributed by me personally, because I found a distributor, and the distributor was an outsider distributor. They were a small DVD distributor, but they're the ones who got it put up on the streaming services, and they're the ones who created the DVDs and put them into libraries and stores back when DVDs were a thing. Like.SHARE.FOLLOW, however, was actually essentially not an outsider film, because it was financed and produced by Blumhouse, and then sold to HBO Cinemax. So those are big companies. Those are Hollywood union companies. What the thing is that Blumhouse was at the time financing outsider-ish small-scale films on the hope that they would have another Paranormal. Paranormal Activity was an outsider film that got picked up by the business, and because it cost so little and made so much, became a model that everyone was like, oh, let's make a cheap outsider horror film and then sell it for billions of times more. So I worked at for Like.SHARE.FOLLOW, I was working outsider-ishly, but for the industry. And that's a very good example of, is that an indie film? Not really. Okay. Agree, there were never so few obstacles to becoming an indie filmmaker. Yes, that's right. Yeah, you can write, direct, edit, sound mix, color correct, and distribute almost free. Certainly, I mean, like there was a race to the bottom for a long time of what's the lowest budget you can do. I think Clerk's original budget was, I think, $27,000. Famously, El Mariachi's was like $6,000 or $7,000. Do remember, that was not the finished film budget. That was the finish that got them to a festival where they got picked up by the industry, and then they threw another $250,000 at El Mariachi. They in order to upgrade the visuals and to add the sound, improve the sound and add the score and pay for the distribution. There are lots of things that do cost even when a no-budget film is picked up by the business. You don't see it. Oh, thanks. Busy backgrounds fascinate me. Me too. That's why I made one. This is just my office. This is just what I need around me to feel comfortable. Okay. Yeah, you are welcome, Donna. Do you usually write TV pitches before the scripts? I personally would not, because I have had the experience, if you pitch something, you are promising that you're going to be able to do it. And until I've actually done it, I can't actually promise that. Could go wrong. I actually once stupidly pitched my take on a job, on a rewrite, on a job where somebody, a movie company had an idea and they were like, would you like to write it? And I pitched my idea about that. They bought it. They said, yeah, we'll hire you at union rates to write this script. And then I panicked because I wasn't actually sure I could do it, because a pitch is like, oh, there's going to be a turning point where the guy realizes he always loved his best friend. And then, but how you actually make that work, very often it's just generic until you've figured it out. And I just didn't feel confident that I could do it. So I turned down the job after I had gotten it. I regret that. That was a stupid thing to do. I should have just figured, what the hell? It's a job. Do your best and see and take the money. But I did not do that because I was a scared idiot. The answer is, in the industry, TV people tend to try to pitch their idea before they write it, because if no company is interested, they don't want to waste their time writing. I feel that's dumb. I feel if you think something is good, write it. Now, very often, people are required to pitch something they've already written. In other words, you can say to a company, I want you to read my thriller about, zoologists. And they'll be like, tell me what it's about. Like, tell me the story. Come in, spend 20 minutes, pitch it to me, show me pictures, make me not have to read. And then if they like that, they'll say, let me read it. That's often what pitching is now. But I personally do not do pitches. Well, I mean, personally now I just don't do anything because I'm retired. But when I was working, I was not too comfortable pitching an original idea. I thought, why not just write? If I like it, I want to work it out. I want to solve the problems. And then then I'll pitch it and get somebody to read it. This was not good business. Good business is work with people, get their take on it, adapt. Like when I write something, I solve it to the best of my knowledge, to the best of my ability. And so what happens is, once I've done that, if somebody comes and says, oh, do it a different way, I'm like, no, I solved it. I got it right. That's my problem. That's not how the business works. So that's why I was bad about pitching stuff. Okay. Please let me apologize about my input on Tuesday. I'm going to give the story a complication. I said, no, that's okay. I took it as the joke it was intended to be. And you do not need to apology accepted, but do not at all worry about it. It was a joke. Jokes are fine. Okay. So yeah, I personally think, here's the thing about writing the full script. What if, you spend the time to, I don't consider writing a script wasting time. People in the business are like, it's a waste of time to write something if it doesn't get sold. Well, you can never tell what's going to get sold. So people who do that, they're thinking, I am going to write whatever they want. That's not how I operate anyway. And I would advise you not to write. If you are not in the business already, that's a bad way to write, because people often don't know what they want until they see it. But even more than that, you are going to need to write a lot of scripts to get good, and you should do the ones you love, do the ones that you see in your head, the ones that you're excited about. And hopefully that will be exciting to someone else. But they're not even going to want to hear your pitch until they've seen that you can write well. The script has to live without you. A pitch doesn't live without you. So the script is better, because also 5 years from now, if you've written a script and it's set, in a tennis camp, and then 5 years from now you hear about some producers like, geez, we've got this tennis camp location. I would make a movie there, but we have to get a script written for it. You're like, I got one. And that does happen, by the way. Hi, this is Kitschy. Yes, absolutely better. Yes. Good to see you. Thank you. My problem is that I am a creator. That is absolutely among my problems. I got a lot of them, and some of them don't shrink down to such a self-satisfied solution as I'm a creator. Hi, Najo. Good to see you. Speaking of creators, Najo writes a lot. Okay, so I think I'm gonna. Oh, good. Besides, when would you would give a better pitch when you know the script through and through? This is a good point. Burgundy is just knocking them down. This is great. You care about it because it actually exists. It's not an abstract idea. Yes, listen to Burgundy. Next time Burgundy should do the live stream. So I think I'm going to sign off now because I got some family coming in from out of town for the weekend, which means I will not be here Tuesday. I will be back Thursday, for those of you who are keeping track. So have yourselves a great week. And let's see. Finished a draft recently. Used the table read function and fade in. I was skeptical, but it really helped. Oh, dialogue and action. I caught a bunch. That's really interesting. I don't know what that is because I haven't written a script on on fade in. But I do know that there's like things that automate and give voice to scripts and stuff, and that's cool. Anything is cool. Anything you can do with this stuff is cool. I would just say different things work for different people, and but table reads in general can be really cool, neat. All right. Well, all of you have yourselves a great week, and what the main thing is, go write something.